This game's scary. Let's be real for a second. Superman, when it comes to his video game adaptations, really hasn't had the best time. Ugh, gross. But there was a Superman game that came out almost 20 years ago that I vehemently remember enjoying as a kid. This is Superman Returns, and upon its release, it received less than stellar reviews. Even some recent reviews call this the worst mainstream console game ever. Settle down, Josh. I'll do the fucking reviews around here, right, mate? So let's take a look at Superman Returns for the PS2 and see if all this hate was undeserved, or if it's more of a case of you needing to return your copy of the game for a refund. Now we open with a really quick tutorial that practically teaches us how to control our flight and our different abilities. And after we do that, the game poses a simple question of where is Superman?
We had become so accustomed to looking into the sky for help that we had forgotten how to save ourselves. Yet disasters have come and gone since he left us. Mankind has learned how to survive without him, and perhaps we no longer even need Superman. But on the anniversary of his disappearance, one question remains. Where is Superman?
You see, at this point in the game, Superman has been missing for about 5 years, but no one seems to know what happened to him or even if he's still alive. But boy, are we about to find out! We learn that he's been missing for about 5 years as he's ventured off to his home planet only to find that it's been destroyed and he is the only thing that remains from Krypton. He gets captured and has to fight in this World War Hulk kind of scenario, and eventually you defeat this guy and his little boy toys, and then you fly back to Earth. Now this is a movie tie-in game based on the movie that shares the same title, Superman Returns. So we'll drop our expectations just a little bit. Some things from the movie happen here, like Lex trying to make a new island formed from the crystals found in the Fortress of Solitude. However, as to be expected, there are also new elements like other villains trying to take over the city that just do not happen in that movie. Now speaking of the city, one decision that I really liked was not giving Superman a health bar. Instead, the city gets the health bar. However, this does come with a little caveat. This may be divisive for some, but it made total sense to me at the start. If Superman did have a health bar, he'd only be able to fight extremely strong opponents that could bring that down. Or there'd be some BS kryptonite excuse to nerf him, and in doing so, you lose that Superman fantasy. So in a pretty smart move, they gave the city the health bar. You know, the city that he feels is his sworn duty to protect. You instantly put the players on notice about how much destruction is being caused in your city. You instantly begin to care about its damage, and its defeat also spells your defeat. Rather than worrying about your own health, you need to worry about the safety and well-being of those around you. It's not a decision for everyone, but I really like that take, and it just feels very Superman. This also means that you can't be an asshole and do things like rip off the globe from the Daily Planet and start throwing it around the city. Nope, you can't do that. Now, if you do want to cause havoc in the game, you can, to a point, do this as Superman, but obviously the game will stop you once the city's health has depleted. The game does, however, let you play as Bizarro, where the whole point is to actually cause as much destruction as possible. I think the devs kind of knew that we were going to be assholes and try to destroy the city, so they just kind of baked that in as a mission, which is really nice. Now, to that caveat regarding the city's health bar. As I said, it's a neat idea on paper, but this is an idea that is implemented throughout the entirety of the game, and it's a large contributor to the game's overall sense of monotony, especially by a third or fourth hour in. So let's talk about the mission structure. This game only has a few different variety of missions, with its main variety coming from the actual enemies that you fight. You will occasionally get a burning building that you need to put out, but then the other 99% of the missions relate to a type or several types of enemies spawning into an area that you need to fight. Once you defeat them, XP is added to this bar, and once this bar is full, the main narrative will move on to the next point. Here comes the issues. Because you are basically invincible as Superman, all enemies just attack their surrounding environments and the people within them. They take fairly decent damage away from the city's health bar, and after a few hours, you become really tired of ensuring the safety of the city. Enemies might blow up a car as a result of their punch or do something else, and it turns into this middle management kind of game. You need to shift your focus from enemies over to saving civilians just to get some of that city's health bar back. But there are also going to be 6 cars that blow up on the way, which renders your save completely pointless. Now you might argue that this is what being Superman would actually be like, having to juggle and prioritize threats against the safety of the city's people. And I'd agree with you, but after 6 hours of playing through this game where the missions and the same objectives keep repeating, keeping the city safe was no longer enjoyable. They really should have balanced this out here by giving the city a health bar in certain missions rather than relying on this as a mechanic for the entirety of the game. And when you think about it for 2 seconds, it's just really dumb. You'll have some enemies spawn in that hit one small section of one small building on a tiny street, but this concentrated amount of damage is apparently sending the whole city into collapse. Come on man, let's get real. Now thankfully there is a cheat to give the city an infinite health bar, and does this ruin a large mechanic in the function of the game, removing any and all consequences? Arguably, yes it does. But what it also does was to allow me to not have to worry about the destruction being caused in one small area, and I could just focus on taking out the enemies. It removed that middle management aspect, and it only proved to me that so many of these repetitive missions would have benefited by simply not being tied to the city's health bar. As soon as I took it off, there was a heightened sense of freedom and ability to really focus on the enemies and dive right into the combat here, rather than trying to find that one enemy that is causing the most damage to a fucking window. It allowed me to play the game in the way that I wanted, which only increased my overall enjoyment and fun. So how do you pick the missions in this game to fill up that XP bar? Well, you don't. You fly around Metropolis and wait for the missions to pick you. You'll get an alert on your map and you'll fly down and kick the ass of anyone who spawned in. And this, unfortunately, is the game. Rinse and repeat that for 6 or so hours and that's it. The frustrating thing here is that the missions will not spawn in if you're also flying at the fastest speeds, which leads to many moments of you just flying around to a new area, stopping for a moment, not seeing any missions spawn in, so you fly to the next area. On top of this, the missions also don't relate to the events taking place in the story. Lex could be growing a whole new fucking island laced with kryptonite, but the game will still be like, you wanna fight these guys again? This instantly created a disconnect between the missions and the game's narrative, one that makes a player loathe the repeating and recycled missions as they feel like a hurdle rather than an organic extension to the actual story taking place. The enemies themselves are all fairly basic and they aim to take advantage of the myriad of abilities that Superman has. Some can only be taken out with melee attacks, others have to be taken out by a long range attack. And because enemies are recycled, you'll very quickly become an expert in what methods are most effective against each enemy type. Now I love the attempt of trying to change up the gameplay in this way, but using the same enemy for hours at a time made them lose all impact and interest, and it's just such a shame. Now the boss fights are also equally a bit of a letdown because they rely on the exact same tactics to take them out as you do with regular enemies. Most of them are easily disposed of by throwing a car at them or by giving them the old fisticuffs. My favourite fight would probably have to be with Metallo because at least his fight resulted in a giant robot fight that provided some kind of visual difference to every other enemy in the game. You do face other villains like Bizarro, Mogul and a few lesser known villains too, but they're fairly inconsequential and you'll fight them 4 to 5 times. Oh yeah, that's right! The game also recycles its boss fights to further pad out the game. How good is that? Let's not create new and interesting scenarios, let's just Control C and Control V all up in this bitch. Now look, it's not all bad, the game actually does some things extremely well in my opinion. First, the flying and the sense of speed that comes with that is masterfully done. You can fly around as normal or hit high speeds and break the sound barrier. Flying around Metropolis and weaving through buildings felt fantastic. And as you progress through the game, you'll also unlock more combat combos as well as upgrades to the variety of abilities that you have. Your heat vision will become more intense, your freeze breath has a wider reach, and your super breath becomes infinitely more powerful. Each of these abilities will have a super form too, where you can dish out powerful moves that deplete your stamina bar for the trade-off of potentially taking out multiple enemies all at once. Now this is great for crowd control, but not great if you're looking to preserve the city's health bar. There are other things to do in the game, like finding cats, and that contributes to the growth of the city's overall health bar, and you'll get a couple new suits as you progress from the game, but aside from that, and a few things expected in the gallery, that's kind of the whole game in a nutshell. Once you finally beat the same enemy for the 400th time, and eventually make your way to the end of the game, you'll quickly realize how rushed this game was. Lex is successful in creating his new island and defeats Superman, and Lois somehow spots his body in this murky ass water and somehow gets him out of that water. After that, Superman goes into space to recharge, lasers the island and throws some of it into space. You don't get to fight Lex in the game, and he only ever appears in cutscenes to push the story forward, and you never really get to do any cool shit on this new island. For someone who's meant to be the main antagonist, Lex really took a back seat here. The lead up to this big showdown has you blowing tornadoes back and then alternating between freezing them and heating them. Once the island is formed, there's only about 10 minutes of gameplay and cutscenes before this huge catastrophe is resolved. Again, mostly through cutscenes. You don't actually get to experience this in a gaming format. They could have had a really sick sequence here where Superman is given a health bar that depletes the longer you stay on the Kryptonite island. Even giving Lex a power suit or something like that. But no, after defeating the tornadoes, everything else plays out in a cutscene and the game just finishes. And even then, the game still gives you the exact same missions after everything has been resolved. God damn it, fuck off! There are some good things in this game to be sure, but with its over-reliance on using the same enemies and same mission structures without tying into what's going on in the overall narrative, it creates this huge rift between what the player is doing during their gameplay versus what is being shown to them in the cutscenes. It really felt like I was playing one game but watching the cutscenes to another game on the side, and there was really no cohesion or link between the two. Now this obviously led to some fairly substantial pacing issues which only made the game suffer more. It is a much better Superman game than previous entries under the Man of Steel, but it's a game that ultimately falls short under the weight of being a rushed movie tie-in game rather than a game constructed with the sole intention of showcasing just how amazing a game based on this character can be. I really don't think that this game is worth the 1-star reviews. However, on the flip side, I also don't think that this game is deserving of full marks either. It is a very mediocre game after replaying it, but there are certainly features in here that prove that there is a formula for making a good Superman game. Hopefully one day the Man of Steel can get his time in the sun in an isolated game, focused on telling us his story from a new and interesting perspective.